G'day, listeners. Today we're joined by Miles Whiticker. He's the long-term president of the Pirate Party. He's also, not long-term,
Not the current president. We're actually in an election period at the moment, and obviously I've stepped down for the duration of while the vote is going.
Okay.
But I have nominated for president, and with little luck, maybe I will be.
He's been the president of the Pirate Party in the past. He's also very involved in the Fusion Party repeatedly as a candidate. So yeah, we're going to chat about the big thing for the Fusion Party at the moment is the whistleblowing policy. We'll also chat about direct democracy, Miles's outlooks on how best to run a society, also the meaning crisis, people struggling with that. So let's get going. Welcome to My First Party, the podcast where we meet the people rebuilding politics from the ground up. I'm Owen Miller, the convener and a candidate for the Fusion Party.
And I'm Peter Jonas, and I'm just advocating for the devil as always.
My name's Miles, and I am a general troublemaker and digital nomad. These days, I call myself a stream citizen.
Extreme? Sorry?
Stream citizen, as in river, as in flow.
I see.
So the idea comes from a blog in 2012 where there's essentially backpacker routes around the world where people travel. And so there's common routes like you go from London to Paris to Berlin to Austria, Hungary, then through to Istanbul. Another popular route goes through sort of India, Southeast Asia, Malaysia. Then there's the Australian one as well. So through the East Coast, through the state capitals. So stream citizen is someone who explicitly lives in a state of flow. They're moving between cultures, between countries, between ideas and people and communities in a way that sort of connects across all of them.
I see, yeah.
So I was also is it a very Western view? I know the term flow isn't necessarily, but the examples you gave, like geographically.
Well, many different cultures and countries use tourism. And so like prototypically the standard backpacker everyone envisions is they're French, German or English speaking. They're traveling between the tourism hotspots of the world, like London, Paris, Ibiza, Bali, so on and so forth. And so from that sense, sure, the stereotype is very Western, but many other people as well, they travel the world, and there's kind of like hidden streams here as well. So for example, for very wealthy, well-off Southeast Asian people from Southeast Asian countries where there's huge wealth inequality, they will come to Australia for holiday in very, very small quantities. And so that kind of like busts the stereotype about rich Australians going to Bali, going to Thailand, going to Vietnam, and then splashing around vast amounts of wealth.
Sure, but the common thread in this flow is affluence, right?
Not necessarily.
Well, in comparison to where people are visiting, it is relative. So a rich person in Japan will come to Australia. A rich person in Australia will go to Bali. There is a tiered, relativity, but we are relatively able to just go backpack.
I wonder as well, have you read the movie, what's that one? The Beach? The self-obsessed narcissist, Julia Roberts, Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah. Oh, it's like wish it, want it, get it.
Well, she doesn't get it, does she?
No, well, she did. She goes off with the Spanish dude at the end.
Now he's spoiled it for that. Okay.
And then they die.
I don't recommend that movie, by the way. Did you? Yeah, it's a shame. David Stratton has passed away. Maybe it's our job to step up and give Owen tips for movies.
I did meet him in Berlin in 1991 when I was backpacking.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, actually, yeah, funny. I met Margaret Pomeranz, actually. That was fun.
Yeah.
I was working.
It's always about you. What?
Oh, it's about Margaret and David.
He's the host. That's his prerogative.
I thought we were co-hosting.
Sorry.
You've got me on the false pretenses again.
But no, it was fun. I was working at the Star, the casino at the time, and there was a party going on. What do you like the TV? It must have been the Logies, maybe. And then it was a fun time for all those guests and that. And then I was very surprised. Margaret Pomeranz was the last to leave the party. I wouldn't have.
She said, "Get out of my way, idiot."
There's always a right time to leave the party, and it's never when you're the last one.
Yeah.
Can I just say, movie I'm obsessed with at the moment, The Holy Mountain by Andrei Jodorowsky. Utterly insane. They're like you feel like you're on psychedelics watching it, or dissociatives. It's about 9 old men who live on top of a mountain who have the secret to immortality. And there's a cult leader who recruits 8 followers to travel to that mountain to stake the secret of immortality.
Oh, okay.
And it is utterly bizarre.
Is it, I guess, like motivational for you? Is this what you see?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Pursuing the secret of immortality through ideas, through words, through action.
So you're saying no hallucinogenics required, or
you feel like you're on hallucinogenics watching. It's one of those movies where the visual effect and the screenplay and the writing and the dialogue is just so incredible to invoke those feelings.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting as well. Like, would you say, starting out a small political party, I've heard the comparison that, like small religions, cults, they're essentially like startups, but in the religious space.
Oh, absolutely. There's incredible theories. Stop me if you've heard this, but it's called the stoned ape theory. Have you guys heard it?
The stoned ape.
The stoned ape theory. So the idea is that everyone's familiar with the evolutionary narrative about how humans evolved from monkeys, right? So that's Darwin, 250 years old or something. But there's sort of like a complementary theory, which is that yes, monkeys had big brains and curiosity to go and experiment with tools, but what got them to that point was, in fact, when you get bitten by a snake or a poisonous toad or a scorpion or something, if you survive that venom, it actually has hallucinogenic properties.
Oh, interesting.
And so what many of these hallucinogens will do, such as LSD, is it'll actually increase your neuroplasticity by severing some neural connections and making it easy to form new ones, which is essentially the biochemical basis for curiosity and innovation.
Yeah, wow.
And so this is why there's actually a culture in Silicon Valley. You'll find that among a lot of startups, not all of them, but some of them, there's actually like this mini culture of microdosing LSD to improve your innovation and intellectual curiosity, to think outside the box, come up with brilliant new ideas, innovative new ideas.
Yeah, wow.
And so this stoned ape theory essentially goes that like the original snake cult was in mythic times, people would literally deliberately get themselves bitten by snakes, and either you die or you have insane prophetic visions about how to change the world, and then you have the confidence to make that happen.
Yeah,
that might explain why Elon Musk is constantly in the cocaine.
it's not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea. Ketamine's a depressive though.
Yeah,
so it'll reduce your brain activity. He's on a lot of uppers as well though. I think he's doing
an oil salesman, which probably with a snake.
He's on like three separate drugs or something. He's on uppers as well.
I wonder actually, on that note of the poison and all that, you might have heard this theory, Miles, though fact. So there's this particular, what do you call it? Like you can get this disease. It spreads from it's from rats to cats to cows and to humans. And I forget the name of the disease, but the point is it slows down the reaction times and it makes all these animals like less fear averse. And so it has the same effect in all these animals. And it's pretty common in humans. I think it's like 0.5% of the population has it worldwide. And interestingly, so they were offering this like university lecture about like startups and starting a business. And they tested everybody who turned up to this lecture. They were like twice as likely as the regular population to have this disease. So these people, were less likely to be worried about fear. They would have slower reaction times as well.
Well, a big part of agency culture is actually overcoming that anxiety and fear to get started. And so like when I say agency culture, there's a whole subculture online, kind of originated in Twitter, but it's spread to various sub-communities. And it's summed up by the phrase, which we have to keep reminding ourselves, that, you can just do things. And like, it seems like such an obvious truism at first. But then you stop and think about it, and you're like, actually, hang on a second, like my instinctive reaction is laughter, like that's obvious. But if it's so obvious, why didn't I think about it?
Yeah.
Like I can just go out and do the things that I want to do and have the impact and the change I want to do. Why don't I just do it?
All right, can I just put all that in context? So, we're all talking about, things that are done online, right? We're talking about computer stuff, right?
No, we're talking about pursuing any goal.
Any goal?
Yeah.
Yes, because I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Agency means having impact in the world, making change in the world, doing things in the world. That can be online, that can be offline, that can be in any context whatsoever. People pursue self-actualization in 1,000, a million different ways. It can look different for everyone. And regrettably, so many people just are unable to get up those ladders. And there's legitimate issues with, like we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy, for example. So many people in the world struggle with access to food, to shelter, to medicine, right? To basic means of survival, or have to work silly hours, 3 jobs, just for this basic access to survival. So we in this room are like the top richest 1 or 2% people in the world. Is how extreme this access to resources is.
Speaking of Maslow's hierarchy, viewers, loyal viewers would remember last week's episode with Alex Kane, the philosophy. He's opening some of that chat. But yeah, I guess one of the things that came up, it was similar when you were saying about like how we can just do things. It's it can feel daunting, and I guess a big problem for many people, when you say as well, it's they just nothing really appeals to them enough to focus on like, well, what's my goal going to be? I'm going to have a goal. It's a shame to let life pass you by, especially many people are inclined. I'm not saying that the prescription for everybody is to get involved in politics, although it does. Don't you find it puzzling that you meet what do we call these people, like civilians, the non-political people?
I'm not political. I don't want anything to do with politics.
But like you meet some of them. And
viewers, can I just say, you might not have an interest in politics, but politics has an interest in you.
It affects your life either way.
Exactly. Exactly.
But I mean, like I was chatting with the neighbours yesterday, for instance, and they read the paper voraciously, but they're not part of a political party. And I don't understand. It's like, how can you see all these things going wrong in the world? And what do you just yell at the clouds?
I've always had a political conscience, always as a little kid, right? But I'm not part of a political party. And I can't subscribe to any of the political parties. But I'm very political, and I've always have been. I always will be. And at least I know my daughter is. She's a social worker, but I don't think she'll subscribe to a political party. I don't think it's mutually, inclusive that you have to be, part of the party.
That's a good point.
To have an opinion on how the world should be, that's political. To not have an opinion on how the world should be, that means you're
ignorant,
implicitly approving of the status quo, which is a political position.
Totally agree. And that's what I keep saying in almost every episode, that you get the government you deserve. So just being ignorant to it, you are complicit in it. It's like being in the workplace and you see something going wrong and you walk past it, you are complicit in that behavior. That's the culture that you actually condone.
Yeah, actually, I've chatted with some of the previous guests. We were talking about, the ongoing genocide in Palestine, and how despite the protests, especially around Brunswick, around Melbourne, despite those protests, still Labor was re-elected in Wills. Labor won the seat in Melbourne now, and yet you see, these protest walls that 2 weeks ago now on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Maybe 300,000 people marching across the bridge saying, we want Australia to do something to end this genocide. Miles, how would you explain this paradox? Do the people actually care? And if they do, well, why didn't it show up in the election results?
Yeah, so there is a legitimate issue with recency bias and availability of information, particularly within the media cycle as well. And so the first thing I would say is that acknowledging that this is a complicated issue between Israel and Palestine, but it's very clear that, to me at least, that as the more advanced developed society, Israel has a greater responsibility out of any other sort of way we look at it, that Israel has greater capacity to impact the future of the region, and therefore Israel should take on greater responsibility. So that said, I've received feedback many times that what can we in Australia, what should we in Australia be doing about this conflict on the other side of the world, which is often portrayed as a religious conflict. And putting aside that framing for a second, because it's not strictly accurate, I'd push back on a few points, but putting that aside, there's a very clear and straightforward way that we in Australia that we can at least have two impacts. One is that obviously a great amount of trade and exchange happens with the region, with Arab countries, but also with Israel itself. And so that's economic exchange, social, cultural exchange. Many Israelis come here and to the Australasia region on vacation, part of that sort of one of those backpacking routes, the stream scissors that I mentioned. But then also there's military trade and exchange too. So Australia does have a small military industry, and there is exchange, two-way exchange with Israel. And so in that sense, we have a very clear legal obligation, in addition to an ethical one, to make sure that if we are to produce any weaponry, the bare minimum that we have to do is to make sure that usage of that weaponry complies with human rights and with our values and our principles as Australians. And it's clear to me and many other people around the world that's not the case. That's not happening. There is a very clear breach of human rights that is occurring. And so what we have to do then is make sure that the government actually enforces those legal requirements, those ethical requirements, and that protection of human rights. And at a minimum, that means that that exchange should stop until we can verify that human rights are being respected in the region. And so, and the other way then is through multilateral international negotiations. So the UN receives a lot of criticism, and I will agree with some of it and disagree with others. The criticism that I think is fair and valid is that to a greater or lesser extent, the UN is a product of the agreements of its membership, and that the Security Council, a minority among the membership of the UN, essentially can dictate a large part of the policy of the UN. And so, for example, if one of the Security Council members disagrees with the policy, they just have a straight veto. It's like, okay, cool. So the UN has a strong bias, therefore, towards no action and not intervention.
Are you saying that we should maybe get rid of the vetoes?
No, but I'm just saying, like, this is
a status quo.
This is a problem, and I don't have a clear solution. But like, this is a criticism I'll agree with.
I think it's realistic, though, the fact that there is a veto.
Oh, and sorry, I should have preambled maybe, or ended my response about why I'm not in a political party, then preambled, then this is the reason why. So, it isn't a complicated issue for me. This is clear. Yeah. This is clearly a genocide. There is no, I can understand Israel's position. Australia is expressing Australia's values in this instance, because what we do is who we are.
Yeah, I guess so.
So it isn't about, we've got different values. This is what we're doing. So yes, there were people that were protesting. There are people who actually have some humanity in this country too. Unfortunately, as a nation, we're also complicit in what's happening. And there is no other view that, maybe Israel has a right to defend itself. No. This will show up in history what it is.
Well, it's disappointing. Like, I remember in the lead up to the election, I remember meeting a tradie outside, and who would have guessed we were chatting about politics, but he said to me, I don't give a fuck about Palestine. It's disappointing that that view, it is pervasive, and obviously not many people are actually going to say it. But to all these people who say, like, this doesn't affect me, why am I going to care about it? What if Australia was ever in a time of need?
The whole thing is, why are most of them here, right? Because there were
who's here, sorry?
The immigrants. The guy, for instance, because there was major conflicts in Europe.
Yeah.
And that ignorance was like, not us, them.
Yeah,
cause the conflicts, because again, you get the government you deserve, you get the tyranny, because people are ignorant to what's going on. It's not about me, And then, he didn't suffer that. He's as a consequence of what occurred there. And then in years to come, there'll be other issues, but he'll be gone.
Yeah. It's, I was going to mention as well that, if we do choose to care, why can't Australia be in a position where we're proud of our morals?
Exactly.
I'm not saying that, we should be, take the moral high ground and sort of, condemn everybody else. But can't we sort of take the moral high ground and, I guess, just not pontificate while we're at the top. But then, because it sets us up when we start talking about like climate action, for instance, a common argument there is, China emits more than us, the US emits more than us, so why should Australia do anything? And I think a big part of it is, again, being able to take a moral stance, being able to be a country that can be respected around the world. And then, in turn, people are going to listen to Australia. For instance, besides purely CO2 emissions, you see like the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, they keep polluting the seas with plastic crap.
If you came to me and said, Peter, would you sleep with me for $1 billion? And I'd like, I've done it for less, right? And then you said, would you do it for $1? And what do you think I am, right? As far as my character, then if I'm only doing it for $1. Now, Australia gives away all its minerals to the mining companies.
Yeah.
We demonstrate to the world what we are. Take us.
Yeah.
We are your economic slut, right? So we have no say on the world. They look at us when you go there and they know what we are. Just take us. So as politically, they know we're for sale. They know the government's for sale because we do it. So we have this is just talk. Even when Albanese comes up and Penny Wong comes up and, they've got a mandate now. This is all bullshit. Penny Wong saying, we're selling armaments, but it's just a patting on the seat. It's actually
non-lethal military
it's actually
equipment.
Tom Cruise's air freshener that hangs off there. For fuck's sake, they should be fucking kicked out for just doing the lying.
So there's very two clear actions that Australia can take to influence Israel here. One is obviously through unilateral agreements, through trade and economics and research agreements, and the other is through multilateral approach through the UN and through influencing other bodies in the region as well. And so our government can be taking that action and should be taking that action, and it's an act of extreme cowardice by Albanese and Penny Wong that they've started only just in the last few weeks started to make noise in that direction. And there's a point about last year, halfway through last year as well, when Penny Wong started calling for a ceasefire as well, and she alleges she'd been doing it the whole time, and yet, like a dime, at a specific date last year, her language suddenly shifted, and prior to that point, she was saying that Israel had a right to defend herself. I've lost all respect for Penny Wong, that the work she'd been doing to repair diplomatic damage in the Southeast Asia region was exemplary. She performed incredibly well there. That the complete and utter diplomatic failures by the Morrison Liberal government was utter shameful, complete corruption and incompetence. And yet, for all the good that she's done, the shallowness and utterly hollow nature of her stances with regards to Israel-Palestine is utterly appalling. And to be honest, I should have seen this coming from the start, because as a married gay woman, she repeatedly voted against gay marriage in Australia all throughout 2000, the early 2010s, until suddenly became politically safe to do so. And then she followed the rest of Australia, and Albanese follows the rest of Australia. And very clearly that's what they're doing as well, chasing votes with no values and no principles, and doing the bare minimum performatively to try and show like they care about what's happening in Gaza.
But you mentioned the word performatively, but to her credit, Penny Wong, this is where I think she has to be given credit. As a stateswoman, not person, whatever the term is, she has begun to talk very meaningful now.
Didn't she always?
She's just following her speechwriters.
But now it's actually even better.
So, I'm not sure if the listeners will be able to hear us.
Well, that is how good she delivers the bullshit. Right now.
Okay.
The best speechwriters that money can buy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Remember Bill Shorten, the deputy Labor leader? He was getting his speechwriter $300K per year for his speechwriter.
Obama was an incredible speaker, but they said that his early speeches as a senator were halting and meaningless and aimless and just wandering. And then at some point or other, he actually got a good speechwriter, and then pretty much overnight, the quality of his speeches increased massively. And so, not to say that as influencers and people seeking to change public policy, that we shouldn't use the tools at our disposal.
No, 100%.
To actually build a message, but at the same time, also we have to recognize when a message is being crafted purely to take advantage of the paradigm shift that we're going through, and the change in public opinion that we're going through, which obviously very clearly supports the Palestinian people and their human rights.
I guess my point there was that is the only thing that's improved of her. She's been a fraud from day one.
Yeah, pretty much. We'll put this in the snippets. Anyway, changing topics a bit, Peter. Have you ever felt like going to jail? I guess another way of wording it is, have you ever thought of being a whistleblower?
Oh, jeez.
Put it on the bucket list.
Yeah.
There's a 70-year-old lady in France who actually did that. She was about to go into a home, and she thought, well, I've never been in jail in my life, so I want to do it. So she went she went down to the police station and asked for a policeman to accompany her while she jaywalked across the road. And then said, can you put me in handcuffs and spend a night in the cell? And so they put a mattress in there and they did it.
Okay.
Lovely 70-year-old lady in France.
Yeah.
Very sweet.
Interesting.
And then she died like 3 months later.
Oh, okay. But it's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because I was going to mention David McBride, for instance, one of the whistleblowers that I guess very prevalent in Australia at the moment. So I was reading before the podcast, researching his life. He's led a very interesting life, and I guess including going to prison now, which is a shame. But I guess actually, we should give the listeners a bit of an update, background. So Mars, correct me if I'm wrong, but so David McBride, he was a lawyer in the British Army and then the Australian Army. He ran for Parliament. Were you aware?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, in a state parliament seat in Coogee, a beachside suburb in Sydney. Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't win. It must be a Labor place. But anyway, but yeah, so he was he served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and then he was getting increasingly frustrated at the management. He was saying that politicians and the army brass, they were setting rules for engagement that were really strict, and that the soldiers would have to like really be second guessing themselves and then maybe get killed. And yeah, they were basically being hung out to dry by the top brass, and that if they did, second guess themselves too much and get killed, the politicians don't mind, because like when they attend the funerals, that'll be good press for the politicians. I don't know if that would be the case. But anyway,
that going to a funeral as a politician wouldn't be good press.
Well, because like the public would lose. They'd stop endorsing the war if people are getting.
But I don't think that's what he was whistleblowing for. Specifically.
Oh no, but he was annoyed about the rules of engagement.
Sure.
Yeah. And then so he tried raising the issues internally. That went nowhere. Then he reported it to the AFP, the Australian Federal Police. That went nowhere. Eventually, he leaked it to the ABC.
Yeah.
Then the Federal Police raided the ABC office and found out who the whistleblower was. And so he got sentenced to 5 years in jail. His defence was that it was in the public interest and he had a duty to report this sort of thing. The judge ruled that that wasn't part of his job description.
Just kill people. To kill people, Eddie.
So then he pled guilty, and 5 years in jail, like very rough. Yeah, it's and it's such a shame as well. I don't know if anyone has heard, but like Australia, it was deemed that Australian soldiers have committed war crimes in Afghanistan. That was revealed. That was revealed in these documents that he leaked. And then the war criminals don't go to jail. No. He goes to jail. The whistleblower. It's utterly outrageous. And I guess Peter, who was the guy you were telling me about in Lend-Lease? There was
Lend-Lease. I think it was Tim Watson. I think from Lend-Lease. He was their tax lawyer, I guess. Lend-Lease, and he discovered there was double dipping that was going on. I think it was around 2015. He basically went internal in Lend-Lease and said, this is going on. We shouldn't be doing it. Lend-Lease basically did nothing. He went through all the stages within Lend-Lease, and all of them said, no, not interested. Not doing this. Don't want to touch it. He then went to the ATO, and the ATO said, look, I'm laying in your lap this basically tax fraud that's going on. And the ATO said, yep, it's true. Then subsequently, he's the one basically getting...
there was a lawsuit. What was the...
Well, so KPMG basically cleared this as well. They were involved with this as well. And KPMG said, no, there's nothing going on. So they were colluding as part of this fraud that was going on. But effectively, he's the one that got sued. I think he had to put his house up for mortgage and everything.
What was the basis of the lawsuit? I wonder.
Well, they're saying that he had no access to. It was illegal for him to actually produce these documents. He's basically being prosecuted while I guess the executives, and I can't remember now the individual who was CEO, whatever, of Lend-Lease. He left with I think about a $60 million payout, and he's gone to Crown and then Star Casino as jobs as well. Funny enough, but they've all escaped prosecution. And again, we're talking about involvement with the big four, right? It was KPMG in that one, and what we had.
Remember that scandal on
Price Waterhouse?
I'm thinking Deloitte. I think it was who was.
No, it was PwC.
Is this the one that they were giving Google advice how to write the new
whilst telling the ATO how to sort of manipulate how they were getting manipulated by these companies. So it was effectively treason, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point.
And they're back in now. So there's this double standard with the corporations.
Oh, the government can appoint PwC.
They're back.
Yeah.
They're back.
Wow, yeah.
So, there's double standards with the corporations. They get away with all this, whilst the whistleblowers are the ones who are facing all the consequences. And even though the government came in and said, we're going to tighten these up, they did tighten them up. It's sitting tight for any whistleblower.
Sorry, just for the foreign viewers who might not be familiar, the Australian Tax Office, they were changing some tax rules. And they were being advised by PwC, did we say? And then at the same time, PwC also had Google as a client and was giving Google advice how to get around these new laws that they themselves were creating. So, outrageous conflict of interest. Yeah.
I've been heavily critical of Google over the years, but most recently, about 2 years ago, I was part of a press release that the Pirate Party put out to actually tentatively come out in support of Google against the we called it the newspaper tax.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and essentially it was
Murdoch and
the media is in a pretty sorry state in this country. We have a huge issue of centralization of most media organizations being owned by the Murdoch empire, and then a lot of the rest going into the sort of Packer-owned ones.
Fairfax, yeah.
And so they're looking to secure that monopoly and maintain it, but at the same time, their reader base is dying off, so their profit model is disappearing in the age of the internet. And so when a rent-seeking monopoly starts to find its extractive value disappearing, what do? They look for another source of reliable income, which they can set up rent-seeking on. And obviously the internet being, with Google, with its monopoly on ads, is quite a significant source of money. How can they tap into that? Well, let's try and charge them a tax. And so that was the link sharing tax with news media articles. And what happened was the Australian government bought the Labor, no, it was a Liberal government at the time, I believe, bought the argument that these companies are profiting off it by including it in their search results, which is utterly ludicrous. That it's like, okay, well, but they're actually funneling traffic to your news articles. That you don't seem to like understand that, or alternatively didn't care. And so what Murdoch was asking for was a lovely, nice little rent charge for the privilege of funneling traffic to their ad-supported sites, with a hefty monthly subscription as well. And so essentially we came out in support, or I should say in opposition to the law of bringing in that tax. There was a pretty brief protest by Google and Facebook where they briefly banned the sharing of news articles on their website, but eventually they capitulated and just settled with however many millions of dollars it was to support the Murdoch media empire, which is ridiculous. So Canada's actually going through the same thing at the moment as well. And Facebook seems to be sticking to its guns with the media ban this time, and the sharing of links to news articles from most mainstream news organizations is actually banned in Facebook in Canada at the moment, which good on them. And I think they should probably hold to it as well and let them suffer. And unfortunately, it's all we can do to sort of grin and bear the link sharing tax here in Australia for the meantime. But you can actually make a change on this. The Labor government is just as complicit as the Liberals on this one. But if you were to support us in the federal election in 3 years' time, then one of our policies is very clearly to come in and support freedom of expression and support businesses in this area. As although we're not explicitly pro or anti-capitalist, what we support is strong and effective regulation to both support competition and ensure that all of society can participate in this economic activity.
Yeah, actually, I wonder, Canada following Australia's laws, it reminds me, the freedom of speech overlaps a lot these countries as well, especially in Britain. And it's worrying. How true is it? I see some stuff popping up on Twitter about like in Britain, if you post a meme Facebook message, basically
the police come knocking on your door.
Yeah, outrageous. Do you know, is similar stuff happening in Canada? Are you aware?
No. So Canada has a very laissez-faire approach to this kind of thing. It's they often get stereotyped as being America's younger brother.
Remember the trucker protests during COVID though?
It's, having saunas on the street, and irritating the hell out of everyone in Toronto. And basically they just clogged up the streets for about a week, honking their horns endlessly.
Hey, this was a political protest. This wasn't them just acting up for the sake of it.
Well, no. I agree with you. But what I'm getting at is that there's no, for me as a relative outsider, I'm not seeing necessarily a debate about free speech. Rather, it's more of a cultural and policy-based conflict underlying that. And the protests get their message across by being heard, but then are just mostly ignored by the mainstream establishment anyway.
I really don't agree with that assessment. So I don't know if all listeners are familiar with the trucker protests, but so there was some sort of quarantine they had to go through when they were going across the US-Canadian border, and they were annoyed that was too restrictive. And so they were protesting. The government didn't like it, so they tried to break up the protests. Then people were donating money to the truckers while they weren't working. So the government froze their bank accounts. Then people started donating Bitcoin, so they started freezing all the Bitcoin exchanges. And yeah, the Canadian government was even trying to investigate how do we shut down the Bitcoin network itself, and realized they couldn't. They didn't have that power. It was outrageous, and many people just sort of shrug their shoulders. Oh well, I don't like the truckers anyway, so who cares? It was outrageous government overreach, I feel, and it's times like this.
Meanwhile, everyone was being locked in their houses. Did you say it happened during lockdown?
Yeah, during COVID, yeah.
But, you use the term as big government overreach. Like a lot of people had, other concerns.
Well, but like the fact that they're like shutting down these protests and everything.
Yeah.
But you see incidents like this about, in the UK, the cops turning up at people's door because of the Facebook post. It's all these things, that they have a pretty consistent theme that, many of these people get called cookers for pointing out like these similar events happening in Western democracies. And so why are they all similar? The quote unquote cookers.
I think as the point you made, it isn't about, it's about the freedom of speech, or I think you said your platform in the next election of 3 years' time will be about freedom of speech and advocating for it. If I heard correctly.
Oh, well, yeah, the part of it, sure.
Yes, which is what is happening here, which is trying to suppress freedom of speech through different means, whether it's the monopoly of the Murdoch-Fairfax press here, and wherever, even the fact that we've got two-party system which are colluding with each other, with Labor, Liberal, Democrats, Republic, and they have this whole show going around, that there's something different. They both do the same. They have the same policies.
Well, like exactly when we talk about this sort of collaboration, collusion, I was going to mention, people get called cookers for saying that, all these policies in Western democracies are similar because someone is a puppet master, someone's pulling the strings. And, these people point to the World Economic Forum, to the International Monetary Fund.
Well, can I say, even like the Ziegel report that Labor, got drafted as far as, what we should or shouldn't say as far as, Israel or Zionism and so forth, that is like, we already have rules in place as far as what that can but can't be said. That's another restriction, because I'm going to limit, say, university funding and what universities can and can't say and teach. It's like, come on, that is an overreach beyond we should tolerate.
Oh yeah, because if they're going to get government funding, though, that's pretty reasonable, isn't it? Like, if we're going to give you the money, we have some. Because I guess
a principle only up to a certain point. So in the case of anti-Semitism, it's often used as a club to try and shut down legitimate criticism of the state of Israel, which is obviously unacceptable. And so to give sort of a counterexample, I guess, and we can look at the Trump administration policies trying to shut down the DEI within any kind of research grants as a writer. And so the whether or not you think that's reasonable, I personally don't think that's reasonable, writer, but whether or not you think it's reasonable, it's not any kind of clearly thought or reasoned policy in the way it's executed and written, because what we found is that there's incredible amounts of overreach in how it's applied. And it's merely used as an excuse based on clearly inconsiderate keywords as such. So I think there was an example of research into a long-term cure to HIV.
That was deemed
in the US, it was deemed too woke.
And
that was cancelled under this no DEI funding under the Trump administration, which is utterly ridiculous. At the same time, also, one of the cheapest long-term interventions to preventing large-scale mass suffering, which was, I believe, provision of, I believe it was HIV medication as well.
Oh, okay.
Or HIV medication in Africa
that would make sense.
as a US aid program. And it was something like $500 million a year or some significant figure, which was essentially an apostrophe mark on the US budget. And that was shut down, and that was saving huge amounts of lives every year. But obviously, because in that case, it was too woke.
Oh, well, I don't know that counts as too.
You saw the new Labor education minister that said the funding to the Victorian government schools now have to introduce that the only proper marriage is for a male and female.
Oh, wait, sorry, that's
just happened.
Clear breach of secularism, separation of church and state. There's no way.
No, I just made that up. I just made that up because but it could happen, right?
Oh, well, yeah, because there was a Labor councillor who...
Well, yeah, but it's not dissimilar to the example he's giving where take it, to what extent will you take it until you say it isn't right?
Yeah.
Until it impacts yourself.
Oh, no.
Your own principles.
I was just trying to think out loud because it's... if we're going to say, we're the government, we're funding these universities, so we get some say, I guess it's fair enough to say, like, have engineering, arts, but then in terms of the actual curriculum within arts, within engineering.
But that's what they're doing.
Yeah,
we want our evangelical view of the world to exist in how we raise the next generation of children.
I guess same as when they fund the ABC, they're not meant to be telling the ABC these are the sorts of stories.
No, we just put ITA in there because what does ITA think?
Is she still around?
Liberal Party appointees in to run the ABC, and so there's now fairly clear evidence that the ABC has been running with the pro-Israel bias in the coverage of Israel and Palestine, because there's an open letter signed about almost over 100 journalists saying that we've been pressured internally to provide pro-Israel coverage.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And because you couldn't see it.
Yeah, we'll be clear.
Well, yeah, actually, it reminds me. So, there's a whistleblowing inquiry going on at the moment. The government's proposing to create a whistleblower protection authority. And so, yeah, Fusion. Well, I guess I was writing a submission what we should do about this. And yeah, actually, one of the proposals we're making is that Australia should fund not just the ABC and SBS, but maybe other organisations as well.
Like the CSIRO, they should get back to them.
Oh yeah, too. That's a good point. Yeah, it's it does fit in this policy.
So much funding was cut from them during the Morrison administration.
Yeah, but then so like I was giving the example like Al Jazeera, for instance. So yeah, viewers probably would have heard of it. So that was it was mainly the BBC cut funding for various people in the Middle East. And so then the Qatar government stepped in and decided, like, this is a great opportunity. We'll fund all these ex-BBC people to cover news in the area. And, it creates a lot of soft power. Just the facts that, like, these stories are being reported, that, the Middle East and Northern Africa isn't just, like, an afterthought. And they, now they can be more of a source of where things actually start, where ideas are formed. Not just
sending George Nickers with an open shirt and standing on a rock, looking sexy from Australia, talking about something.
Yeah. But I guess the viewers might be suspicious that the fact that like Qatar's funding this, does that mean they're getting a whole bunch of biased coverage?
Well, it could. But you need to be aware of that at least.
There's a very simple solution, which is that Israel can open the borders to Gaza and allow international observers
100%
from every single media organization on the planet to enter.
Well,
they're currently banned. And
you're taking your life at risk.
Are being executed by Israel. So over 200 journalists killed in there, deliberately targeted by Israel. And that the evidence for this is undeniable. That the recent murder of Anas al-Sharif, it's actually come out that the Israeli, I believe it's Mossad, as recently as a week before they killed him, were attempting to blackmail him to leave Gaza and stop reporting. And obviously he rejected, and then a week later they executed him and the entire Al Jazeera camera crew. And their defense is that he was a member of Hamas 10 years ago, and their only evidence for that is a single piece of paper, which is potentially fraudulent. And so we're left with a very small amount of circumstantial, potentially fraudulent evidence that he was formerly a member of armed forces, and instead have tried to use that to justify his extrajudicial execution. And so it's not even a valid justification to kill him and the rest of the journalist crew. It's an attempt to try and get rid of sympathy for him and for the Palestinian people and introduce enough doubt into the situation.
I guess, Al Jazeera, if they shine the light on anything, then I guess once the truth is out, the stories.
Essentially, the only truth that's come out of listening to the Israeli propaganda is that they are the mouthpiece for anti-Semitism at the moment.
So who's the
like
mouthpiece?
Stories like that, like they're coming out, they're committing these atrocities, and then they're saying, just like I was listening to Netanyahu the other day, and he's talking about how he believes the corners are booby trapped by Hamas.
80% of buildings in Gaza that have been destroyed were, according to Netanyahu and others within Israel, were booby trapped by Hamas. So you essentially have like over 2 million people in Gaza, the vast majority of them civilians, have for some reason or other decided to install bombs inside their houses, and therefore their houses have to be demolished with or without them inside it. It's utterly ridiculous.
And so the hostages are clearly hiding somewhere, and so the IDF are blowing it up anyway. So what part of this narrative are they missing a whiteboard? Did someone take away one of the whiteboards and they're just mixing them around? Like, it just...
There's extreme conflicts in policy and no clear policy direction. The Israeli military establishment has recently come out in the last few weeks that they're more or less strongly in opposition to Netanyahu and the Likud coalition in the Knesset, in opposition to their plan to occupy and stay in Gaza, because there are no military objectives, there are no strategic objectives, and the policy is essentially being determined by bureaucrats sitting in Tel Aviv who have no idea what it's like on the front lines and have no plan for what to do on the front lines.
Sorry, when you say they have no idea, I thought military service was compulsory in Israel.
Well, that's right, yeah.
Well, so
I'm talking about the careerists within the IDF.
Oh, anyway, the main point is that there is a genocide, I guess. But actually, thinking back, I wonder, before we were talking about the whistleblowing, I guess, Miles, should we chat more about the fusion submission? It's because you were reviewing it as well. I guess the viewers might not be aware of what the current state of affairs is for whistleblowing in Australia. There was, remember the National Anti-Corruption Commission that was founded the 2020 after the 2022 election. There was strong demand beforehand. We need this to happen, and then it turned out to be very underwhelming what got created. Well, this is part of the Albanese government's promise that when they get elected, they'd bring in an anti-corruption commission. There's been entire political movements pushing for it for over a decade. The Liberal Party, of course, obviously opposed it, and it seems almost absurd that what do you call someone who is anti-corruption? I don't know. Let's sort of dig into that a little bit.
Scott Morrison.
And so Labor's like, well, of course we oppose corruption. Just vote for us. And then they didn't bring it in. But what they brought in instead was heavily watered down without the clear protections that we need and demanded during the campaign. And so, like, this is more evidence, just like with Petty Morgan Albanese finally realizing that it's politically safe to recognize a Palestinian state. Nothing else, of course. They weren't called to stop the genocide, just that we'll make a purely performative action which can be safely ignored and beg Netanyahu to forgive us before we actually just make a decision. It's ending with whistleblowing and anti-corruption as well. It's safe to create a meaningless empty board staffed by our friends which will do nothing, and we can put a few $1 million a year into as a sort of afterthought and not actually bring in any serious protections, like with David McBride being penalized for this absurd loophole that it's not in your job description. Well, I'm sorry, but like if your job actively involves corruption, illegal behavior, unethical behavior, human rights breaches, or war crimes, then obviously that's not going to be in your job description to report on that, because that's part of your job.
I think the best example of the anti-corruption and why they're not actually moving on it is rowboat debt, right? So like with rowboat debt, there's been some preliminary hearings, and they basically said, there's at least, I think, 6 or 8 they've identified that people have been corrupt, including Morrison and a few others.
Yeah, that's right. And then the NAC decided not to pursue it anyway.
Correct.
Two of the Liberal ministers at the time decided to conveniently resign before the results were announced to spend more time with their family. And I'm proud to say that I was involved in both of the by-elections to replace those corrupt so-and-sos.
You're including Aston, who was that guy? I can't remember his name.
Good.
Who was the other one?
Can't remember either.
Okay.
They're both Liberal Party ministers, and their legacy is essentially tarnished. But this is the Liberal Party, that they have no principles and no policies, and they're entirely shallow and hollow. The one sort of lip service which I'll give to Labor is that at least they have a partially defensible platform and set of values, whereas the Liberals, you can go on their website, you can look at their flyers, you can talk to their candidates, and there's a classic example of the campaign in the seat of Bennelong during the recent federal election with our candidate John August. I was talking to his counterpart from the Liberal Party, the candidate there, and we were at a candidate forum, and the Liberal candidate got up and said, well, I met this guy, and I shook his hand, and I met that guy, and I said, oh, how bad is cost of living? And his entire 15-minute speech was just name dropping and talking about shaking hands with people. And I went to talk to him afterwards, and I said, Mr. Liberal Party member, can you, Mr. Liberal Party candidate, I'm sorry, but I didn't quite catch any policies in your speech. Do you have any policies? And then he said to me, in a direct quote, well, there's such a thing as a values-based campaign. And so then I looked to him and I thought, which values are those exactly?
No. Well, to be fair, like
There's a lot of currency in that speech, though.
yeah.
Well, currency in his wallet as well.
If this is what people vote for, though, but actually, it reminds me, I wanted to get your take, Miles. So the election's not over for everybody, still all these months later. So in nearby, you're familiar in what's that place called? North Shore. Anyway, Bradfield in Sydney. So yeah, an independent, a Teal candidate won there.
Nicolette Buller, yes.
Yeah, so she won by 26 votes, if I recall correctly.
Wow.
Yep, after the recount.
Oh, okay, yeah. And so the Liberal Party is now challenging it in court. I don't know what the basis of the lawsuit is anyway.
They have no basis.
But okay. Well, but then, so I got an email from, just the standard fundraising stuff saying, Nicolette is going to court. So she's defending these claims. And, so I said to them, like, why are you raising, hundreds of thousands of dollars defending this? Just let the Liberal Party waste their money. If you think you validly won, just let the Liberal Party do the lawsuit themselves. Like, why do you need to come to court as well to throw this money down the drain?
Well, there's such a thing as standing on principle, and
Well,
I'll acknowledge you're probably right that there's no case and almost no chance that they'll succeed. But at the same time, like, there's a concept of dying for a cause, and in general terms, I will absolutely defend the impetus, and I'll also argue as well that we should feel courage to stand up for the things we believe in, even if it feels like it's not needed or it's redundant or it's a hopeless cause in the other extreme, that we should have the courage to stand up and stand for the things that we believe in and actually advocate for them in the world around us.
Yeah, but what are we standing up for here? So I mentioned to these people, if you
Following due process.
No, seriously. Well, if we're following due process, like, let it happen. Why does she need to be involved in this case? I said, like, how can you take the moral high ground anymore? If you think that Nicolette deservedly won, then, let the recount happen or whatever it is. For you to, do these legal arguments and try blocking another recount or whatever it's going to be, isn't that basically saying, like, no, we're scared that, her victory wasn't legitimate. We don't want any chance of there being another recount or whatever. I don't see how can they have a moral high ground anymore in this.
If there's any chance that there could be an overturning of the case, then it's better to be safe than sorry.
Well,
this is the thing about our legal process, though. It's adversarial in the sense that the people with the best lawyers, that can afford the best lawyers, tend to be the ones that get the best outcomes. And so the Liberal Party has very expensive lawyers because they have very expensive donors who have a lot of money and not many morals. And so the end result is they will pay for access to justice. And without a similar legal challenge to try and stand up for justice and for due process and for human rights, then those with money will essentially buy their way through the legal system. That's how the civil court works.
You're saying Nicolette Buller and her supporters should endorse a legal system that's not fit for purpose?
That's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there is a mismatch of access to justice. And so in this case, the Liberal Party has, I think they sunk something insane, like over $100 million into the Bradfield campaign. That amount of money, and they got so close by having no policies, no values, simply saturation. They barely even had many.
Look at the Teals themselves. When you say no policies, like the Teals openly admitted that they had no policies and they were going to be told what to say by
they have policies.
electorate.
They have policies that came from the electorate. Right. So the candidates themselves didn't necessarily bring the policy. The candidates brought values.
Tina Brown nearby in Barara, I remember getting an email from her campaign. This was like 1 month to go, 2 weeks to go sort of thing. Oh, we have policies now. Where did all these volunteers before? Why are these volunteers volunteering for someone just on good vibes? And, she doesn't have any policies. They'll come later. We're not worried about that.
Well, actually, I really like this process. So what they do when you get into it is that there's a process of policy formulation and consultation which essentially follows direct democratic principles, where they'll put together kitchen table conversations with people in the electorate. They'll door knock people in the electorate and say, we want a movement that actually represents you and not, special interests and rich foreign donors. And so what do the people in this electorate care about? let's actually have that conversation. And that's how the process works. And it's not quick and it's not easy, and it's sometimes difficult forming consensus. But the point is that there's that process in place, and it actually does lead to outcomes.
Yeah, these people, a big, raison d'etre for these people, they say that, the parties, especially the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, they're beholden to donors, that sort of thing, as you say. Well, I mean, the Teals, they're still beholden to donors. They're still beholden to, they meet someone, they knock on their door, this person tells them what the policy is.
So just to understand, what is it that you are advocating for then?
Well, we should be voting for people who aren't beholden to anyone. Like the Fusion Party, could be.
But you're saying these Teal people are beholden to the people.
Yeah, but like it's just populism. These people, they're not academics.
There's a fine line between democracy and populism. And so while I won't explicitly defend or advocate for populism, and there's valid criticisms of it, we can and should be looking at a democratic system, which is actually at a minimum representative of the people in there, and potentially even better, gives people a direct voice and not, let's say, I'm going to appoint this person to make decisions on my behalf for the next 3 years, which isn't democratic.
I think we need to keep in mind that, when we're talking about the Teals, we're just talking about disenfranchised, gentrified people, right? So
not in all cases. In many cases, but not all cases.
We're talking about in generalized terms, right? So we're talking about they're coming out because mostly they don't like the Liberal candidate that they're in. And so they're looking for an alternative in there, generally speaking. So, but the process and the principle of how that's coming about is the right way of going about it. So if you could take that, let's say here, and let's say you take off your fusion sort of identity and say, well, Brunswick, what is it that we want here? What is it that you want? That's how it should be generated organically. And you as a vanguard could probably lead the discussion, right? To say, look, this is my experience, this is what I think, and help inform the discussion.
Well, look, there's a valid criticism of populism here, which is to say that, let's look at Murdoch Media as an example. They have a news dominance, and you have an entire generation, potentially generations, who are essentially a slave to the TV, to radio, to newspaper, which told them what to think. And there's a very serious issue with any kind of governance political process here, where large parts of most electorates were essentially being told what to think by a major foreign-owned corporation. That's hugely problematic. And so that's essentially from a populist angle, it's like, okay, but here's a whole lot of people who think that, we should kick out all the Muslims from Australia because that's what the TV is telling them to think. And the TV is saying that because that's what the rich owners of that TV station want them to say. And so there are genuine issues with populist approaches like that.
I wonder, Mars, have you heard the criticism? I quite liked it. They said the Teal movement is basically letters to the editor made manifest. Because when you ask all these people, what are your thoughts? How should we run the government? An alternative, which is what I was trying to pursue as the non-human party, an alternative is like, we spend a lot of time researching the issues, coming up with policies that we think are going to work, and we put it out there to the electorate. Here are our ideas. Do you like them?
Okay.
It's your,
all right. Yeah. So one of your policies was nuclear.
Yeah.
Do you think it resonated in Brunswick? Out of context.
Yeah.
I remember you and I spoke about it when I first met you, and I said to you, okay, talk to me about the current energy issue right now and how we can get the mining companies to do X and Y, right? That was a discussion we had there, I remember, over a year ago.
Yeah.
And I said, let's do the short-term, medium, then I can, engage with you on the long term, right?
Because it's going to take a while to install this nuclear power.
Because one of your first things you said to me was, you spoke about a few other things in nuclear. I'm like, you've just disengaged me right now because the major issues that we have aren't that.
Well, it reminds me at a candidates forum, and it would have been in Brunswick, I think. Some people were asking about nuclear, and I realised that my answer sort of pissed off the entire room.
So putting aside specific issues for a second, essentially what you're describing is a system of government called technocracy, or an approach to government, I should say, called technocracy. And you can kind of sum it up by saying, let's get the best technical evidence available on these issues, and let's determine a policy. Essentially, have subject matter experts determine a policy to address this issue based on a pre-chosen set of values or principles or a desired outcome. And it's brought a huge amount of good in the world in very straightforward terms. We want good outcomes on health. Okay, well, let's get the best health systems and the best way to deliver public health outcomes. We want good educational outcomes. Well, let's have a really effective forms of teaching. Let's have good student-teacher ratios. Let's have great engagement with the community.
Yep.
We want good outcomes on the economy. Well, let's have thriving, well-regulated economy, and let's support that market activity with grants and education.
Like CSIRO, et cetera, all the stuff we've put in place.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then like issues start to creep in here where, as an example, who gets to decide those values? Who gets to decide those principles? Who gets to decide that outcome?
The voters. If there are plenty of parties, then, we don't need the author to, do a poll or whatever. The poll happens like at the final vote itself. Imagine if there are like 50 parties running at the election, and some of them could be like AI generated.
There aren't 50 parties.
What was that, sorry?
There aren't 50 parties. There's 2.5 in Australia.
There are a few. We've discussed some of these problems when Simon is on. But so that's a thought experiment. Imagine plenty of parties in Australia.
So what we have instead, and I say 2.5 parties, the Greens are essentially half a party in comparison to Labor and Liberals. Not a criticism, just like a comment on their size, essentially. They're quite small compared to the other two. So what we have now instead of a true technocratic government, which Labor and Liberal both like to imagine themselves as, what we have instead is major donors which essentially write policy. And the Liberals don't even do it up front. They say vote for us because we'll make everyone rich, and they don't say how. And then after the election, it turns out they make a very small number of people rich. They're actually talking about their donors who then pick the policy after the elections. And for Labor, it's like, well, they realize the small target strategy, which is say, let's have no policy and just vote for us because we're not the Liberals, and then we'll have a very small amount of policy which is politically safe to do after the election, which is cowardice.
And in this case, they went after the half party for this election.
Yeah, absolutely, which is like utterly destructive. And so like you can have a technocratic approach and make the right sound bites and say, well, we've got some evidence which suggests maybe we could do something, make some noise vaguely in this area, but then ultimately like it ends up being complete political cowardice and not actually going for any kind of meaningful change or reasonable outcomes, many of which are divorced from the electorate. And so the massive protests to support Gaza are a great example here, where it would have been trivially obvious that the majority of Australians don't like genocide, that trivially obvious the majority of Australians don't like war crimes, that the majority of Australians want human rights protected around the world, that want the ability to not have censored press, that don't want to have political repression, police knocking on their doors for sending out a mean tweet. Like this is obvious, and yet politicians have no actual pressure on them to have anything to do with this because of that massive delay time between elections of 3 years. Whereas a direct democratic approach, like the Teals try to do, actually gets that direct feedback, and it's built into their entire model. And so you can say, like, yes, we won't have policies 3 years out from election. We'll talk to people during the campaign, prior to the campaign, after the campaign, within the electorate, and we'll have those conversations. And there can and should be education processes, right? You're right that like the issue with populism, if the only source of information that voters have is TV, news, or radio, which is essentially bought and sold by foreign corporate interests, that's a huge problem, and that like undercuts the whole democratic process. So there has to be alternative ways of being informed and having an informed electorate. But on the assumption that we can do that, then why not just cut out a lot of the middle layers and actually get that direct feedback of voters having a say?
In terms of direct democracy, though, my biggest complaint about it is that, politics it's a full-time job. You can't expect the voters to be fully informed about every issue. I mean, wouldn't we say that like a big reason why governments arose, as opposed to, royalty, why we had officials as a government is because it's a full-time job, and we need to choose who's going to pursue this, who's going to come up with the best policy.
But there are counter arguments I would make, and that arguments I make in favor of that position. But broadly, I'd say that we can and should have a measure of government to implement services, the public service, to actually make sure there's good and effective outcomes in health, in education, in infrastructure, in economic regulation, and so on and so forth. But that they need to have, there needs to be this pressure on them from the average Australian in order to keep the values and principles and the outcomes they go for actually responsive to what Australians need, and not beholden to politicians, because most politicians today are beholden to major donors and special interests. And so direct democracy just kind of like circumvents those special interests, circumvents those donors and lobbyists.
You see it firsthand, Owen. Like the OCC in corporate, who
Don't get me started on those people.
They should be, the interest should be of the tenants. Yeah, they're in they're buddies with the developers and the body
Huge
corporates.
corruption. Number one source of corruption in Australia.
And the body
development and construction.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
we see
seems
it
like
firsthand.
Well, it was bizarre talking with our developer. Actually, it seemed as though that our owners corporation isn't actually best mates with this guy, even though they're trying to be. But it's a story.
Look, it's not his first rodeo.
That's for sure.
That's for sure, right?
There's a pretty straightforward way we can say how to approach this. And like in truth, neither of these two extremes are wrong. Direct democracy or technocracy, neither of them are ideal taken to extreme. And so the simple solution is, which I advocate for, is let's have a hybrid approach to the two. Let's have an informed electorate. Let's have subject matter experts. Let's have scientists and engineers and doctors, medical experts, teachers, blue collar working professionals. Let's have them in the decision-making process for things that they know about. And at the same time also, let's give ordinary everyday Australians a say as well.
You said science. I didn't hear the church in any of that.
Actually, remember we had a previous episode where one of the quotes we were meant to guess. There was Socrates endorsing the notion. No, Plato was endorsing the notion of a philosopher king.
Plato, the notorious fascist.
Was he? What?
Have you heard that criticism?
I wasn't aware of this.
That's what it was, under the shadows that he used to sort of look at.
So the critique of Plato being fascist essentially says that he argues that there should be a small elite class who rule society. There should be no democracy, and there should be no technocratic guidance of policies either. And he also essentially argues for a little bit anachronistic here, that his take on what could be considered democratic or human rights at the time, he thinks that essentially those notions are a bug and shouldn't be any part of government.
Yeah, but his girlfriend Helen, she was a hippie and she dumped him. And after that, he just went nuts.
But the reason I bring this up, so we had part of every episode, I like to play a game with the guests. We have a political quote, try to guess it. So a hint today's one is by a philosopher, but it's not Plato. So the quote today, if listeners want to play along as well, it's it is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. So it's by a philosopher around that time. But
Is this Voltaire?
No,
no,
a bit earlier, a bit earlier.
Yeah.
Well, every week I think I always say Marcus Aurelius, so I'll say it again.
Did you have a hint? Okay. It was Marcus Aurelius. Yeah.
I think I say it every week.
I essentially consider myself a virtue ethicist these days. I think there's probably a lot of good to be said about Stoicism, but it's also, there's a lot of subtlety there, which I think is often lost in pop philosophy.
Oh, well, yeah, but I guess actually we were quite
Britney
about
Spears said something similar last week, I think.
it's a lot like you only live once, isn't it?
YOLO.
Yeah. But I guess, wouldn't you agree, like the notion that many people never begin to live? It's unfortunate that, like our schooling system teaches people to be just very obedient, disciplined, becoming like a factory line worker sort of thing. And I guess it fits in as well, doesn't it? The mental health, I guess, crisis we can call it in Australia. People seem to keep getting worse and worse mental health. They talk about like a loneliness epidemic. Because I guess, if you're, people don't get enough sort of freedom to pursue like a personality of their own. It's just, in France, I liked that there was a court ruled some employee was being told by their employer that, they didn't smile enough and they got fired or whatever. And so the French court ruled, you can't force workers to smile. But you see these sorts of, these sorts of rules making everyone into an automaton, to some sort of robot. And I think no wonder there's all this sort of mental health crisis going on. I guess you think about this stuff as well.
Yeah, quite a lot. So with the loneliness epidemic, there's a lot of factors that are coming into it. And the simple answer, one of the simple sort of answers that people often give is that it's things like apps and social media and video games and so on, distractions that sort of
the attention
undermine the attention economy undermines social connection. And I think there's some underlying issues there which aren't as obvious as that a lot of this breakdown in connection things like social media apps and dating apps are kind of coming in to fill a niche where there's already breakdown in connection starting to happen, which was then accelerated by that. And a lot of this breakdown in connection in society comes from the commodification of social relations that we have with each other. And you can see this in 1,000 different ways. And one example is obviously jobs. That like 100 years ago, everyone you might get one job and have it for most of your life, right? You might work in a company or corporation and slowly work your way up the ranks, and you come time to retire, you've worked at the same company for 20, 30, 40 years, and you're quite senior, and you get a really nice, generous severance package, say, hey, well done, thanks for your service to the company, here's a lovely retirement package, goodbye, good luck. But now that never happens. Employees are just cycled through by major corporations and used and discarded. There's no value for loyalty to a corporation, so employees show no loyalty to corporations. And that's just one example, right?
I guess it's probably started, the corporate raiders of the 70s, 80s. I guess that's probably...
Well, it's a byproduct of neoliberalism, right?
Exactly.
So they said, this is who we are. We're just going to start taking it, and we'll treat you like effective debt slaves. And then everyone's like, well, fine, but we'll treat you the same way. And then that's like social consequences.
Well, exactly. And so we're seeing this in so many different areas of society. And what's started to happen is that seeped through into this sort of fundamental layer under society, which has eroded the kind of meaning and purpose that we can find throughout our lives. And so, like, on the surface, it's a loneliness epidemic, a loneliness crisis, and that's a huge part of it. But underneath that, there's a deeper, more fundamental issue, which is a lack of meaning and lack of purpose. The meaning,
which is the I guess the flip side of, unfortunately, we had self-worth linked to our jobs, which is a great thing either, right? But once that was taken away, and it's been this gradual sort of, I don't know, you'd call it curve towards that, the arc on the other side, we've filled it with, apps and so forth, but that's just the symptom. The real issue is the fact that we haven't replaced that self-worth with other connecting stuff, because technology was meant to free us up to have this leisure life, which it hasn't. It's actually, some technologies now just become the life as a substitute for actually living.
Well, that's what you see.
And that's the TED Talk for today.
You see, Miles, you would be familiar with the surveillance capitalism. You see like all the bossware, for instance.
Was it you that was talking about a city in China, or someone was telling me about, there was one particular city that was...
I don't think it was me.
No, someone else.
But yeah, lots of the cities in China, they have, the computer vision everywhere to recognize people. I guess, the Chinese people, I guess they do genuinely seem to think like, oh, well, if it keeps the city safe, fair enough, like this is fine.
Well, it's a heavily propagandized argument. And so, like, going back to what we were saying about how if your only source of media is a specific channel which only says what the people who control that channel information say, then of course you're probably going to believe that, right? Because that's all you know. But going back to what we were saying earlier, in terms of having no meaning or no purpose or self-worth, and there's a theorist on who's got a lecture series on YouTube called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And he's been writing about this for a few decades now, and becoming increasingly sort of prescient. This guy called John Vervaeke, and his argument is that this meaning crisis comes from obviously like lack of purpose, and the lack of purpose comes from lack of connection. And how do we get that connection or purpose through connection? It's through building community, right? And you think about it, like 50 years, 100 years, 200 years ago, throughout most of human history, the way we found friends, the way we found jobs and economic purpose, the way we found spiritual and ideological purpose, the way we found romantic partners, was through our family and through community networks. And now that's completely broken down. Like share house culture here in Australia, as an example, most share houses, you find someone on Flatmates or Gumtree and say, hey, we just need someone to fill a spare room, just come and pay some rent. You hardly ever see them, you hardly ever know them, you don't even like them. If
they start out as strangers,
and often they'll stay strangers. So if you're lucky, there'll be no issues, and you just separate after 1 or 2 years, and this person who is essentially a stranger then leaves your life. If you're unlucky, which is whatever 50% averaged out of cases, there's drama and issues and money and bonds.
In the US,
share house culture.
I used to live in the US a few years. One of my housemates, when she moved into her next place, that guy, he was beating his girlfriend, and then like I think he was threatening to burn down the place, and it was terrible trauma. Yeah,
It sounds like an extreme case, but that's an example, yeah. So like I'll actually come in and use part of the defense as actually a positive example here. In the Bay Area, in Berkeley and Oakland and California, there's actually a share house culture which is wildly different, where you have long-term share houses that you actually have to apply to get into. And they have their own culture and their own community and their own like schedule of events and larger community events with dozens or hundreds of people coming to these share houses.
You were there for a few weeks, weren't you?
I've been there many times. Yeah. And so this is an example of where, in a specific case of share houses, you have real positive, non-commodified community which is for its own sake, with socializing and social connections as a axiomatic, as a good in itself. And so this connection, that gives purpose to their life, that gives happiness and meaning. And so now what we need to be thinking about, I argue, is how do we generalize that? How do we sort of scale that up to the rest of society? Because I think, like, given how fundamental this problem is of the meaning crisis and how it underpins everything in society, how can we look at how to actually address that longer term? Because the negative impacts of this are enormous, touching everything.
I guess the Fusion's answer to it. Do you have any answers to it as well, Peter?
Well, no, not.
But I was going to mention.
Hold on, the bus is just coming.
I'll just phone a friend.
Well, but yeah, I was going to mention, like, Fusion's answer would include universal basic income. Does anything else come to mind for you? Oh, I guess, covering all the whistleblower stuff. I guess, if we can have a society that's getting rid of corruption, getting rid of all the political favoritism,
or what I've learned through these podcasts, smaller government.
Well, I think UBI is a huge step on the way here, and like the reasons for this are just very, very in your face. As soon as we bring in UBI, suddenly all the bullshit jobs just disappear, virtually overnight. We're going to see the economy just completely be reshaped.
I don't know that it'll be a silver bullet, but it will definitely help get rid of.
Well, no, I agree, right? And like for a long time, I was actually arguing that no, it would ultimately prove to be a silver bullet because of just the disappearance of bullshit jobs.
Oh, you reckon it would completely get rid of?
For a long time, I argued that, and I'm sort of backing away from that these days. Like the argument, I think is pretty strong that UBI potentially can ultimately fix most problems in society. And to give the argument there, it's basically that, like, bullshit jobs are jobs that have no social worth, right? You're paid to do a thing, and in many cases, you actively make society worse by doing that, right? And everyone can think of examples of jobs.
Sure,
like that.
but again, we're talking about the exception to why this is beneficial, right? Like, it's an immaterial component.
A job that makes society worse, how would that disappearing make society better?
Again, I'm saying that aspect of this argument is immaterial compared to the benefit of having universal income and what benefits it gives society. Like, how many people, so if you had universal income, the amount of like other pursuits that people can do and what benefits it will give society, they'll have a more material impact than just eliminating these other, let's say, bullshit jobs and what impact it has on society.
The bullshit jobs, though, they're widespread. So there was a study in...
Sure. But again, focusing on that is like saying to me...
It's huge, Peter.
Okay, tell me how it's huge.
Well, actually, Peter's argument is why I've started to back away from this, right? And so very clear and straightforward. The immediate implication of getting rid of bullshit jobs is that suddenly people are free to do meaningful, socially good ways of like, okay, cool. But then the issue is, what does that actually look like, right? And so I thought about this a bit more, and I realized, well, a lot of people who are essentially, extremely well off, huge amounts of free time, in the top 0.5%, like if we're in the 1%, like richer people in Australia are in the 0.5% of people in the world, right? They're still working. So I'm not talking like by generation level, but the more well-off people, they're essentially have something pretty close to a UBI where they could stop working for years potentially, not have to work, and they'd be fine. So they're effectively something similar to a UBI on a personal level. And yet, time and time again, I've seen a malaise or like this spiritual gap, like this nihilism, this meaning crisis still impacting them. That when you have the wealth and resources, whether or not you're wealthy, but you have enough resources to, in theory, get access to anything that you might want to pursue in life, but you can't decide and you can't take that next step to do it, then that means there's another problem potentially bigger, which UBI isn't going to directly solve.
But even that example is still based on how we currently live our lives, right? You mentioned the word bias often, in talking today. But even the people who are quite affluent and, I don't have to work, I can take X amount of time off and just find these flows and do whatever I want. Even now, I haven't had to work for the last couple of years. And even if I talk to people, they say, don't you get bored? Because they're coming from it from their current perspective. And I'll say, I had 6 months off a few years back, and just before I went to work, I was anxious. I needed to go back because they knew that was their life. So I think if the world did change and you had other people who had that income, because now they didn't have to worry about putting food on the table, etc. The world's going to change. So other people who are even better off, they can actually pursue different things in a different world, in a different mindset.
I was going to mention, Peter, it's so if we think of the bored lost billionaire, then like if other people in society are getting universal basic income, then they'll society itself will flourish more. So the disappointed billionaire will then have like people who are fully alive to now engage with.
But the implication here is the disappointed billionaire cares about other people and cares about other people having. I'm not saying here explicitly that all billionaires are psychopaths who don't care. But hypothetically, you have to have this assumption that other people flourishing would give them meaning, right? And so where I'm sort of going with this argument is that if you have the resources and are stable well off enough that you don't have to worry about putting food on the table, having a shelter over your head, then you still have to answer the question is, what is my purpose? What is the meaning I find in life?
Yeah.
And so the argument by John Vervaeken, which I'm also convinced of now as well, is that you need connection, you need community connection, you need spiritual connection, you need romantic, emotional, social connection in order to have that purpose.
Yeah. I wonder then, Miles, wrapping up the podcast, what would be your advice then to the disappointed billionaires who are listening?
Get rid of money.
Well, I think Bill Gates' approach is probably the right way to go, where essentially his goal was to give away all of his money by a certain date, or the vast majority of it, and have a will which essentially says that rather than all of my money being locked up and passed on to my descendants, that it should be used, the wealth and resources of amassed should be turned back over to society if I'm gone. I'm a supporter of an estate tax and taxation generally. I'll debate any libertarian on that. That it's
like the death tax,
the death tax, yeah. And like it's a shameful attempt to try and propagandize it. But I mean, the example is pretty straightforward. Like, sure, care for your family and leave resources for your family after you're gone. But there's a very, very strong inconsistency when you say, as I've heard many Liberal Party people say, they want the right to work hard and support themselves and be independent. And then when it comes to the estate tax, they say that I want the right to work hard for myself and be independent so that I can support my children and my wife and my family so they don't have to work, so they don't have to be independent from me, so they don't have to actually contribute productively to society. Which to me is a vast inconsistency.
I don't know that it is totally inconsistent.
Why?
Like, because they see that like there's a family unit, and so they want independence of the family unit. You're saying like
to what end? When does that end?
But even if we look at like the atomic family unit, right?
Correct.
The traditional idea of the male breadwinner who supports a wife who is not working, children who are not working. Why is the wife not working? Because she's raising the children. Why are the children not working? Because they're children. But as soon as the children graduate and leave home, they start working. They support themselves.
Maybe this is the point.
This is a stereotype, but this is by their logic, their cultural logic.
My other big objection to a death tax is it's a massive conflict of interest. If the government wants to raise revenue, like, or what if these rich people just die suddenly? Don't you see that? Like, that's
but governments don't actually get revenue. So state and local do in a sense. But a sovereign government like our Commonwealth government actually doesn't get revenue. What they do is they issue currency.
Well, sure.
And so when they do taxation, they're not actually getting that money as revenue. What they're doing is taking money out of the economy.
Sure, but they're trying to balance it out. Like,
Well, I think we're missing the point.
No, they're
Not missing the point, but also highlight the, I guess, paradox in the liberals' philosophy and policy, which doesn't exist anyway.
Well, what was the paradox? Oh, I guess how independent they are. Yeah.
There shouldn't be any restrictions to how I generate my wealth, but I also want to give it to my family indefinitely, so
to
they don't
decide
have
how
to,
they generate their wealth.
Yeah.
Decide for them. So that's the hypocrisy there. Going back to what you were saying about balancing the budget in terms of government, that I think fundamentally that's the wrong way to approach it. So when you look at the mechanisms of how government monetary policy works, they issue currency through various means, such as bonds or fiscal expansion, and so taxation takes money out of the economy, which has a stabilizing effect. And so unlike the current government policy, which is to essentially just set interest rates and then hope everything else works out for the best, which is dysfunctional at best and a straight road to collapse at worst.
Well, it's punitive to the wrong people as well.
Well, sure. But there's so many other mechanisms they can have, such as being deliberately targeted with expansionary policy or taking money out of the economy at a minimum through things like taxation. And there's no need to balance that, except if your goal was to support monetary stability, to support economic growth, to support social and environmental outcomes. In which case, you have other priorities. You don't want to just make magic numbers match.
Well, Miles, either way, like the government is going to charge taxes. Don't you agree that it's a conflict of interest? That here's a place to get a lot of tax revenue, and it comes at the death of their citizens.
Well, no, because like my point is that it doesn't matter. They don't have to balance those numbers. They can be wildly unbalanced. And everything's fine.
Okay, they don't have to balance it, but either way, they do want to charge some taxes, and one easy way to charge tax is the death tax.
They only want to charge taxes on the assumption that you believe taxes are revenue, which my argument is that they aren't.
Hang on.
You're treating government like a business. But it's not, because it issues its own currency. Imagine we went to business and said, you can have as much money, you can issue as much, you can create money. We said to us, you can just make money.
Well, are you saying that the government doesn't even need taxes then?
From a principled sense, yes. However, when you approach from a pragmatic sense, there's a very clear need for taxation in various areas to help stabilize the economy, provide targeted economic stimulus or negative stimulus to disincentivize behavior that we don't want.
I feel like you're trying to take both sides in this argument. Like, this is a good tax, but we don't need tax.
No. Well, what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, we do need tax. But your starting point
It's a lever. It's a lever.
Exactly.
Tax is a lever.
Right. So hypothetically, and I will make an acknowledgement to right libertarians here. Hypothetically, our starting point is that taxes aren't extrinsically necessary, right? They're not a metaphysical necessity to have a functioning government, right? I'll acknowledge that. But then at the end of the day, taxes are a mechanism by which governments can administer society and can be very effective in many ways.
Well, for our libertarian friends out there, we don't need to have sex to survive, but the population will eventually
disappear.
So you don't need taxes, but it makes it a little bit more effective, long-term viable. It does.
Yeah.
You know, because I heard no policy from our libertarian friends. If anyone wants to come back on,
I should say,
I actually had a massive debate with a group of the Libertarian Party.
Ours was anyway.
We'll probably have to say that till next episode.
Anyway, we're going with time.
We better finish up. But just as a note, the Libertarian Rachel, who was previously on, that's not necessarily the last Libertarian we'll ever have.
Well, I'm a Libertarian.
Well, either way,
I'm a Libertarian Socialist.
Loyal listeners will know. We would love to have enemies on as well. So this is our second fusion guest on. I'm not sure if it will be the last one, but I love having potential enemies to debate. It would be a bit boring if it's just a filter bubble and we agree all the time.
Not so much enemies, but people you disagree with.
Opponents, yeah. Rivals. That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Anyway, we better finish up. But thanks, listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you.